It was interesting timing. The reason I want to raise this particularly with personal experience of the case, I mean, I know there's all sorts of speculation about what really happened and was Henri Paul drunk and, you know, why they took the route they did. It was completely circuitous. But David and I had personal involvement in it. Apart from the timing, which really screwed our lives over for about a year afterwards, about 2 months after her death, we had a mysterious phone call. And it turned out it was Mohammed Al-Fayed, who wanted us to go to Paris and look at some documents he'd been offered. So, at this point, we're living in a very remote farmhouse. Black Ritz Mercedes comes to pick us up and take us to Paris, and almost crashes twice. So that could have been a good headline. Anyway, we look at the documents. He's been offered these for sale from a guy who's very vague about how he got hold of them.
Oswald Winter.
That's the one. These were documents purporting to prove that there was CIA and MI6 involvement in Diana's death. And they looked good. But if you knew what a document really looked like, what a proper MI6 document looked like, there were some simple errors, things like the date timeline, things like the addressee list, they just weren't quite right. They were forgeries, they were very good forgeries. And this would have been a classic straw man technique. You know, Al-Fayed was asked for $20 million for these documents and probably would have paid if they were real, because he was desperate to prove that there was a plot against his son and his possible future daughter-in-law. This would have been a classic straw man operation, whereby he would have bought them, held them up to the world's media and said, look, I've got proof. And then the authorities would have turned around and said, look, it's so obvious. You can imagine what would have happened. Anything else he ever found out, he would have been dismissed as a fantasist. So, you know, his entire campaign for justice for his son would have stalled pretty much before it started. Anyway, as the lady down there said, the guy who was trying to flog him these documents was a well-known con man called Oswald or Oscar Lewinter. He was also notoriously an MI6 agent. He was quite well known. Most agents were pretty, their identities were quite tightly held. He was pretty well known, though, because he seemed to get involved in all sorts of dodgy activities. So that, to us, proved that there was an MI6 interest in this. And then, of course, we started looking at the other evidence and all the rest of it. And I have to say, my personal opinion, I think, yes, they did intend to at least seriously injure or kill her. And it's not just about the fact that, was she pregnant, wasn't she? We'll never know, because they embalmed her against all French law so quickly. And all the other speculative things you see in the press. It's also the fact that it was reported that she was being a great success in the landmine campaign that she was running.
Yes.
But also, she was about to go into campaigning on the behalf of the Palestinians. Now, you can imagine someone of Princess Diana's profile doing that. They would not have tolerated it. They could not have dealt with that. So I think that's why she was taken out. I think they'd probably been planning it for a while, and it was just perfect timing. They did it when they did.
Again, she may have known too much. Maybe she knew then what QAnons know now. That the Queen's son, Prince Andrew, Duke of York, had become friends with Jeffrey Epstein and became a frequent flyer on the Lolita Express.
How did you meet?
Well, I met through his girlfriend back in 1999, and I'd known her since she was at university in the UK. And it would be, to some extent, a stretch to say that as it were, we were close friends. I mean, we were friends because of other people. And I had a lot of opportunity to go to the United States, but I didn't have much time with him. I suppose I saw him once or twice a year, perhaps maybe maximum of 3 times a year.
But that's not what Prince Andrew's senior aide had to say about it. He claims that they met in the early 1990s and not 1999, as Andrew said in his TV interview. this explain why Diana met with JFK Jr.? Could this also be why JFK Jr. was killed?
Join me now as I bring to this podium a young man whom we all clasp to our hearts and whom we will love today as we have in the past and whom we'll come to love in the future, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, Jr.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
We all know that Hillary was competing against JFK Jr. for the New York Senate. We all know about the kill list, strange deaths that are connected to anyone who challenges them. If we know that now, he knew that then. Maybe JFK Jr. simply knew too much as well. Maybe he knew so much that he planned his own death. Why would he do such a thing? To avoid his murder, of course, and to finish what his father started. Recently suicided Isaac Cappy seems to think so.
I will tell you this. Junior is going to change the world. And he's very, very in touch with the light. It's going to be great, and it's a shame that I'm going to miss it. It's a shame that I'm going to miss it, because I was so stupid. So stupid. Junior JFK. Yep. Junior JFK.
Robert F. Kennedy seems to think so as well. In this next 10-minute clip, we're shown the inadequacies that occurred during that plane crash and JFK Jr.'s alleged death.
The National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, investigates all airplane crashes. They found no evidence in this case of any mechanical problems. The weather was clear and the moon was visible. The radar report shows that John's plane just suddenly dropped, as if someone had grabbed the controls, the steering yoke, and pushed it forward as hard as they could. It looks like a suicide. And it's standard in any accident investigation to examine the state of mind of the individuals involved to assess the possibility that the crash was not an accident at all, but a suicide. So let's do that quickly. John and his wife Carolyn were famous for a fight they had in public, and friends said that for 3 years they had disagreed about whether and when to have children. But in May, 2 months before the crash, John was very upbeat about his marriage and told Toronto businessman Keith Stein that he was looking forward to fatherhood. Stein said, quote, "He talked about having kids as if it were imminent in their future." On John's fatal last Friday, he told his staff not to worry about their jobs because, quote, "As long as I'm alive, this magazine will continue to publish," unquote. This would be a really cruel thing for a guy to say who was planning to kill himself in a few hours. On his last Friday afternoon, John and his wife's sister, Lauren, arrived at the Essex County Airport in Caldwell, New Jersey at 7:30. Witnesses say Carolyn arrived 15 minutes later at 7:45, and yet, while conditions worsened as the skies became more and more hazy as the sun went down, they sat around for 45 minutes. Why? What were they waiting for? This is an anomaly. It doesn't make any sense. In any case, at 8:30, 45 minutes after arriving, John, his sister-in-law, Lauren, and his wife took off from Caldwell, New Jersey, and headed northeast towards Martha's Vineyard, ascending to a cruising altitude of 5,500 feet. An NTSB radar analysis shows the final moments of the flight in great detail. At 9:33, the plane, still headed northeast, began descending from its cruising altitude of 5,500 feet. At 9:38, the plane, while still descending, began a slight turn to the right so that it was headed due east, lining itself up with the southern coast of Martha's Vineyard. This was John's favorite approach to the Martha's Vineyard Airport, since it allowed him to fly over his mother's home on the southern shore, where he spent many childhood summers. At 9:38 and 20 seconds, the plane completed the turn and stopped its descent. The plane was now at 2,200 feet. But it's against FAA regulations for a plane to fly below 2,500 feet without first contacting the tower. So in a manner which is absolutely typical of John's carefulness in following procedures, he brought the plane back up to 2,500 feet. At 9:38 and 50 seconds, with wings level, the plane was on final approach with 14 miles to go to the airport. At 200 miles per hour, the plane would land in about 5 minutes. At 9:39, John contacted the tower. We don't know how long this conversation lasted, but at 9:40 and 15 seconds, 1 minute and 15 seconds later, the plane suddenly dove out of the sky, falling 2,500 feet in 45 seconds, crashing into the water at 200 miles per hour.
We have been told by the Coast Guard that, in fact, there is now evidence of a last communication last night with JFK Jr.'s plane as it was making an approach to Martha's Vineyard Airport. Petty Officer Todd Burgun joins us from the Coast Guard base in Boston. He is the Petty Officer and a Public Information Officer. Thank you for being with us, sir. What can you tell us about this last communication with JFK Jr.'s plane?
All I really know at this time is that it was at 9:39 p.m. and it was with the FAA, and it was on its final approach to Martha's Vineyard.
So at 9:39, to the best of your information, JFK Jr. made a contact with the airport, with the flight controllers, the air traffic controllers at Martha's Vineyard Airport, that he was on a final descent.
That is correct.
At 9:39.
Todd Burgun is a professional. What you heard him doing just now is what he does every day. He answers reporters' questions about the Coast Guard's involvement in rescues of plane and ship disasters. We have seen that at precisely 9:39, the plane had stopped descending and paused at 2,500 feet. FAA regulations require that the plane pause at 2,500 feet, contact the tower, and receive permission to continue. And Burgun reports that it was at this precise moment, 9:39, that Kennedy did in fact contact the tower. Burgun's report is absolutely consistent with the radar information that we got from the NTSB that was used to reconstruct the last moments of the plane before it crashed. Burgun's report is absolutely credible. If he had been off by 1 minute on either side, if he had said 9:38, he'd have been wrong. The plane was still executing the turn and was not yet on final approach. If he had said 9:40, he'd have been wrong. The plane was on its way into the water. How was he able to identify the exact minute that the plane was holding at 2,500 feet, waiting to get clearance from the tower before descending? He had to have gotten that information from FAA flight personnel in the tower at Martha's Vineyard Airport. that Kennedy indeed contacted the tower at 9:39. There is no other possible explanation. This question of radio contact with the Martha's Vineyard Tower is enormously important for a couple of reasons. You see, whenever you contact air traffic control, your particular radar blip is then entered into the FAA's air traffic computer system. If anywhere on your flight path your plane should happen to descend below 100 feet, the computer will immediately set off an alarm at the FAA traffic control facility. So therefore, as a result of Kennedy's 9:39 radio contact with the tower, the plane should have set off a low-altitude alarm in the FAA's traffic control offices when the plane descended below 100 feet. The FAA should have begun the search at 9:40 when this low-altitude alarm went off. They knew before the plane hit the water. FAA regulations also require that a search be begun anytime a plane contacts the tower on its final approach and then fails to land within 5 minutes. As a result of John Kennedy's radio contact with the tower then, the FAA also should have begun a search at 9:44 when John Kennedy's plane failed to land. How long did it take the FAA to begin searching the approaches to the Martha's Vineyard Airport? If this outrageous delay was actually part of a criminal conspiracy, then it's obvious that this information about John Kennedy contacting the tower would have to be disappeared. And it was disappeared. At 12:30, Bergen was removed. He was silenced. He disappeared from any further reports of any kind. In fact, all government agencies, including the FAA and the Coast Guard, suddenly went silent, and reporters were now referred to the Pentagon. That's right. Suddenly the Pentagon became the center for reporting what was supposedly a peacetime activity of search and rescue, resulting from a peacetime accident.
All right, we're told the Pentagon news conference is about to get underway. Let's go there right now.
This is an easily used facility. Both the Department of Defense and the Coast Guard, and to try to describe to you what...
The Pentagon overtly took control of the news reporting of the crash. This was certainly extraordinary. And Lieutenant Colonel Steve Rourke was brought out to do the official line.
I only know for sure that they did not talk to the tower at Martha's Vineyard.
No need to mention Todd Bergen's report, because it now officially never happened. Nothing to see here, folks. Now let's move on.
Along the route, they may have spoken to somebody, but not at Martha's Vineyard.
Certainly not at Martha's. They never made contact with the tower at Martha's Vineyard.
That's my understanding.
Colonel Rourke is lying. There's no way that Bergen's report could be false. None. The news people didn't believe Rourke for 1 second, and they continued all through the day to report what Bergen had told them.
10 o'clock, and as we've been telling you all afternoon, his last contact with Martha's Vineyard Airport was apparently at 9:39 with air traffic controllers about 17 miles off of Martha's Vineyard, and that is now...
Of course, if they wanted to make Bergen's report go away, the killers also had to shut down the honest people at FAA who had told Bergen about the tower contact, and they did.
Do you have any knowledge about that, or whether they contacted Otis, or whether they contacted any other tower within the region?
No, I do not have any more information, and the FAA would be a better point of contact. I have time for
waiting to hear from the Federal Aviation Administration on anything they might add as a result of listening to the tapes, the conversations between, the transmissions between the airplane, John F. Kennedy Jr.'s airplane, and air traffic controllers on the ground.
Your sister-in-law.
It would be really interesting to hear from the Federal Aviation Administration. They must have by now listened to the audio tapes of the air traffic controllers' conversations with JFK Jr.'s airplane from the time that it left. I'm surprised that we haven't heard anything from the FAA just yet.
Hopefully we will hear something from them soon that will give us an indication of what might have gone wrong. From the radar screens, the FAA has said nothing this afternoon. We've only heard from the Coast Guard officials and for the Civil Air Patrol people, but this is what we have. With JFK Jr.'s plane.
This report by the official Coast Guard spokesman was probably the most significant piece of information that appeared in the early reports and was then washed away.
my favorite comment comes from Steve Christofferson. What if John, Carol, and Lauren weren't even on the plane when it took off? What if there was a trained military pilot flying the plane so he could ditch it in the ocean and claim the Kennedys were on the plane? That would account for the missing seat. Could it have been removed before takeoff so he would have a safer exit when parachuting out after putting the plane into a dive? I've never heard anyone say that they saw them take off and waved goodbye to them as they were going down the runway. You gotta believe that John knew if he were to run for the Senate seat in New York, with his challenger being crooked, his days would have been numbered. So if JFK Jr. is still alive, one thing is for sure. He's absolutely involved and behind the Q movement and the Great Awakening. Check out this voice comparison linking JFK Jr. to the voice of Todd Bergen and Q filmmaker Joe M.
This guy named Todd Bergen, okay, is apparently in the Coast Guard. Well, listen to the voice.
All I really know at this time is that it was at 9:39 p.m. and it was with the FAA, and it was on its final approach to Martha's Vineyard.
So at 9:30.
Todd Bergen, right? Okay. Where have you heard that voice before? Well, you've heard it on these videos.
You ever wonder why we go to war, or why you never seem to be able to?
The voice is exactly the same.
All I really know at this time is that it was at 9:39 p.m.
Steal your phone. They can murder you too.
The time is that it was at 9:39 p.m. and it was with the FAA.
I don't know why no one else is talking about this because it jumped right out at me. So if that is the voice of JFK Jr., which some people say, and it's that voice.
Put this guy on and...
No, carry on, sir, carry on.
Okay. This is Mad Dog, and go ahead, Mad Dog. Talk about anything you want.
Okay, first of all, Merry Christmas to everyone. The point I'm calling for, and the reason I'm calling for, is we're on a timeline. Prior to President Trump going to Iraq, out and back, Field, you know what I mean by that term, out and back.
Yep, a round trip.
Yeah, and prior to him going to Iraq, Field, an individual, 677 classmate, flew to London on Air Force One, and then he flew over to Hong Kong and did some business.
Yep.
Then came back. Okay.
Yep.
All right. The next event happened was we had some shuffling of the parade deck, so to speak, of what's really happening. General Mattis was scheduled to go 2 months later, not at January 1st. Okay? So his scheduled rearrangement on the deck chairs has been moved up to January 1st.
Okay.
Now there's a reason. The reason is